Disclaimer. Please state the nature of the medical emergency. Oh, wait, wrong story. J.K. Rowling owns all? The sun was just peeking over the eastern horizon at the Queen's Medical Center in the University of Nottingham Hospital when the Weasleys invaded. Hermione did the talking, sans diadem, when Bill staggered in on his mended leg, supported by George and Percy. Fell down the stairs, shattered spleen, took it a while to see how bad it was, class 2 to 3 hemorrhage, heart rate, breathing rate, body temperature, and so on. "Are you a medical student?" one of the nurses asked. Hermione shook her head. "My parents were dentists, and I read a lot." "Okay, don't worry. We'll take good care of him," the doctors said as they whisked him off to the OR. The waiting room was crowded, with all of them there. Pruitt Manor had been emptied to see to Bill, and there had been 13 people in the house, including the baby. The immediate family was understandable, but Hermione was needed to talk their way around the doctors asking for medical records, and Harry had tagged along to avoid being the only one left behind after Muriel insisted on coming. She didn't trust "that muggle mumbo-jumbo," and planned to give the doctors what for if anything went wrong, ignoring the fact that Fleur would probably tear them limb from limb first. Arthur had also sent a message to Charlie on his ring, but he couldn't travel in safety from overseas. "Some of you can leave if you need to," a nurse told them. "We can contact you when he's out of surgery." Hermione looked back at the group and shrugged at the nurse. "That's kind of you, but I expect we'll stay. 9 of them are his immediate family to start with." "Oh," she said. "Or you can go down to the cafeteria if you want breakfast, then. I hate to impose, but it would help if we could free up some of this space in the waiting room." Just as long as I can find a decent seat," Muriel cut in. "I'm 108, and I ought not to be on my feet too long." Hermione smacked her forehead. She was lucky that wasn't a number that was completely impossible for muggles. "Are you really?" the nurse said with wide eyes. "You don't look a day over 75. Hermione thought that was being generous, but Muriel certainly didn't look her age by muggle standards. Muriel turned and scrutinized the nurse harshly. "Don't flatter, girl. It's not becoming," she said. "And best work on that posture of yours if you ever want to attract a man." "Auntie!" cried Molly. "Be nice. She's only doing her job. We're so sorry about her, dear," she added to the nurse. "That's understandable at her age, Mrs. Weasley," the nurse said, albeit frostily. "The cafeteria's this way." They made their way to the cafeteria and got some breakfast, upon which most of the Weasleys promptly decided they hated hospital food. Hermione and Harry weren't fans, but they hardly saw what the issue was. They'd both had Muggle school food, and Harry had it worse than that in his life. George and Fred were also used to Muggle food in the factory. Fleur walked with them, if unsteadily, leaning on Molly. Nadia was nursing, covered by a blanket improvised into a shawl, and a rag improvised into a nappy, since Bill and Fleur had left all of their actual nappies at their cottage. Naturally, the baby attracted attention. "How old is she?" one of the doctors asked. "A week." "An hour," were heard at the same time. Fleur and Hermione turned and stared at each other. Hermione sighed and sank back into her seat. "You gave birth an hour ago?" the doctor gasped. "Yes," Fleur said. He noted that she wasn't dressed for the hospital. "At home?" he ventured. "Yes." "Goodness, I'll get you to the neonatal unit." "No, we're fine," she cut him off. "But if you're having a problem after a home birth..." Fleur snarled at the doctor. "We are here for my husband, monsieur. Nadia and I are fine. Now leave us alone and see to him before I cut out your..." "Fleur!" Molly hissed, and her daughter-in-law fell silent. Thankfully, the chastised doctor made a hasty retreat. "This is a powder keg," Hermione remarked to Harry. "Yeah, I can tell," he replied. "We should probably get back to you-know-where when we're done eating," she said. "I want to inventory what's left of my gear, and check on Mr. Lovegood." "Merlin's beard. I forgot all about him," Harry said. "Did Luna make it out okay? She wasn't there when we left." "She made it out of Malfoy Manor, but she had to apparate. I don't know if she got away from them tracking her." "Bloody hell, this day just gets better and better, doesn't it?" he grumbled. Harry and Hermione returned to the factory and entered cautiously. "Hello, Mr. Lovegood," Harry called. There was a clattering sound, followed by a squeak, and moments later Mr. Lovegood stumbled into the front office holding on to a smiling Luna like he'd never wanted to let go. "Mr. Potter, Miss Granger," he said. "Thank you so much for saving my moonbeam." "Hello, Harry. Hello, Hermione," Luna said. "Luna, thank God you're all right," Hermione said. "You got away from the Death Eaters?" "Oh, yes," she said. "Cedric apparated us to the Falcons Stadium, where we borrowed a pair of brooms. Then he apparated us to Upper Flagley, and we flew from there. We flew low, so no one saw us from the air." "That's good," Hermione sighed, and sank into a worn-out office chair. Are you all right, Miss Granger?" Mr. Lovegood asked. "I will be, probably. Things didn't go so well for us." Harry snorted. "That's an understatement." "Oh dear, were you captured?" Luna said. "Yes," Hermione said. "Yes, and tortured to within an inch of your life," Harry said, to the Lovegood's horror. "I wouldn't go quite that far, Harry, but yes. It was bad. The Weasleys are all at the Muggle Hospital. Bill was hurt bad, and it was the only place we could take him. Oh, and Fleur had the baby." Luna squealed in a way that was so normal that Hermione briefly worried she was an imposter, but she soon returned to her usual quirky self and said something about Nargles she didn't quite understand. Harry recounted the whole story as he understood it, and what happened at Pruitt Manor while Hermione rested for a bit, but she soon got up to look over what she had left to her name. "Saved my coat," she muttered. "It just might survive for the duration. My sword and buckler." She hadn't brought those on an infiltration mission. Maybe they would have helped. Maybe not. "Dark magic books and my spellcrafting notes, and about half of my clothes and no way to carry them." She wanted a way to pack up everything quickly in case of an emergency, and she'd lost the enchanted handbag she needed to do that. The boys' clothes and some of the twins' prank products were all strewn around their rooms, and they were even further from having a way to pack up in a pinch. She could enchant another handbag, but that took time to do properly, and she was running on fumes as it was. "Tomorrow," she thought. "Find anything?" Harry said. She shrugged. "I pretty much knew what I still had," she said. "Just wanted to be sure. Laundry's going to be a pain in the arse from now on out." "Harry was just telling us you lost your brooms," Luna said. "Do you want the one I borrowed?" Borrowed, thought Hermione. She deferred to Harry, but he declined. "You still have the trace on you for a couple more weeks," he said. "You need it more in case you need to move." "Yes, we'll be fine," Hermione agreed. "We should probably get back to the Weasleys, Harry. We'll need to regroup." Harry nodded. They took their leave from the Lovegoods and apparated back to the hospital. "Merlin's pants," Hermione whispered when she saw a flustered-looking Weasley family talking to one of the doctors and a policeman. She rushed over to them with Harry following. "What's wrong?" she said. "Did something happen to Bill?" The doctor stood up. "Bill is back in surgery, miss. We're optimistic about his recovery, but we would like to better understand his injuries." He turned to the policeman. "Officer, this is the young woman I mentioned who helped bring him in." "Ah, I see." The bobby stood up and faced her. "Would you mind explaining again what happened to Bill Weasley?" "Well, like I told them, he took a bad fall down the stairs," she said, which was actually true. Where was this going? "Is that all?" "Yes, why?" "Well, according to Dr. Biswas here, Mr. Weasley shows evidence of a pattern of injuries over time." "Oh, bollocks!" "I'm afraid I only know about the fall, officer," she said. "I was only visiting last night." "But you are a family friend of the Weasleys here?" he pressed. "Yes." "We took X-rays after we got Bill stabilized, miss," Dr. Biswas said. "We saw evidence of a broken leg roughly 6 weeks ago, broken ribs 4 weeks ago, several more minor wounds 2 weeks ago, and a large amount of scar tissue around his spleen, which, frankly, I don't know how to interpret." The magical healing, of course. Especially their cobbled-together amateur magical healing. The injuries would look like they all happened at different times, and that would be suspicious to the doctors, especially if the family couldn't adequately explain them. Normally, if they had to come to a Muggle hospital, they would have the Ministry to back them up and to obviate the doctors and get him out. No such luck here. "You can understand why we would be concerned for him," the Bobby said, "not to mention his wife and newborn daughter." Hermione took a deep breath. "I haven't heard about any other injuries, officer," she said, truthfully. "All I can say is that I've known the Weasleys since I was 12, and I've never known any of them to be abusive." "We'll be talking to Bill Weasley when he wakes up, but of course we need to be thorough." He turned to Harry then. "And you, young man, you're another family friend?" Harry stared, like a deer in the headlamps, not expecting to be questioned. Yes, sir," he said. "I've known them since I was 11. They're the family I never had when I was little." Dr. Biswas said. "It's the strangest thing, though. You said you brought him straight here?" The Weasleys nodded. "Well, something else doesn't seem right. Based on the amount he was bleeding, the condition he was in when he was admitted, I can't prove anything, but my gut tells me he received multiple blood transfusions before he arrived." "Blood transfusions?" Molly said, cluelessly. "What are those?" Hermione groaned mentally. Dr. Biswas and the Bobby stared at her in disbelief. It was only made worse by the fact that the whole rest of the family was equally confused. "Are you taking the piss?" Dr. Biswas demanded. As they tried to breach the communication barrier, Hermione considered whether they would believe her if she said the Weasleys were Amish. She and Harry tried to intervene, but when the doctor got through to them, Molly gasped in horror and exclaimed, "What? But that's blood magic! You can't do that!" "Molly, that's not what it means here," Hermione cut in. "They can't do anything with it. They just use it for replenishment." Dr. Biswas looked very confused, but whatever he was about to say was cut off by a loud crash and a sound of screams coming from the waiting room. The Magicals all looked at each other in horror, and half of them sprang to their feet, wands still holstered, but at the ready. "What the devil?" the Bobby said. He ran to intercept. "Wait!" Percy was out in front, but the Bobby ran out of the cafeteria ahead of them. Percy motioned for them to stay back, and looked out around the corner. They heard more screams, and he pulled back. "Death Eaters!" he mouthed. That got everyone on their feet, even Muriel. Hermione's eyes scanned the cafeteria in a heartbeat. She flicked her wand and pulled the fire alarm. Unfortunately, a hospital couldn't evacuate the whole building, but it was better than nothing. Harry met her eyes and caught on at once. He dashed to the front of the cafeteria and made a firecracker sound with his wand. "Back away! Back away!" he bellowed. The crowd turned and started the other direction before they could run straight into the killing zone. They felt a shiver as anti-apparition wards came down over the hospital. Arthur took charge of the Weasleys. "Molly, take Fleur and Muriel and get out of here." "No!" Fleur cried. "I have to get Bill." "Fleur, get your daughter out of here. We'll see to Bill." The Weasley men rushed to the cafeteria entrance, as did Hermione, but she grabbed Harry and pulled him back. "Harry, you have to go too. If the Death Eaters see you, they'll call you-know-who." "Oh, it's far too late for that, mudblood." Hermione and Harry spun around to see a ratty little man in a black robe standing in the corner. "Pettigrew!" she hissed. The straggling Muggles ran from what must have been the shocking sight of a rat transforming into a man. Pettigrew tapped his nose. "I smelt the little fawn outside. Rats are good for more than just sneaking, you know." "Harry, run!" Hermione ordered. "No." Harry whipped out his wand and pointed it at Pettigrew. Hermione started to motion for the Weasleys to run out the back way. If you-know-who was coming, they didn't stand a chance out front. But at that moment the doors slammed shut, and there was a long, echoing crash that could only be the sound of every other door in the building slamming as well. Hermione's eyes widened fractionally, and she discreetly aimed her wand at the picture window, moving it in tiny patterns. "You couldn't have known what city we were in," she tried to stall. Pettigrew laughed in that squeaky way of his. "Guess again, mudblood." He withdrew something from his robes, a heavy book, and threw it at Hermione's feet. She didn't bend down, but levitated it with her other wand. It was a nutrition textbook she'd bought at the used bookshop in town. Inside the book's cover was an inscription she hadn't noticed before. Discarded from the University of Nottingham Greenfield Medical Library. "Bugger!" she said. No time to react. "Harry!" she yelled before completing her spell. "Find-O-Vitra!" Hermione had thought about how you-know-who had shattered all the hundreds of windows in the Ministry of Magic all at once. He might have done it with raw power, but glass would break with surprisingly little force if concentrated into a small enough area. The large picture windows of the cafeteria exploded inward to screams from the cowering muggles. Unlike at the Ministry, they were made of tempered glass, so instead of a hail of razor-sharp shards, she was only able to direct a hail of gravel-like fragments at Pettigrew. Still, Harry caught on and helped levitate the fragments. Even as gravel, being pelted by that much glass would definitely slow Pettigrew down. With the windows clear, the crowd was able to escape that way, not that it would help the rest of the hospital. Hermione ran for it, pulling Harry along. They saw some of the Weasleys taking the same route. She heard a crash, and spells flew past them as they dove through the windows and crouched behind the outer walls. Unfortunately, that didn't help much. It only put them in the car park, with some cover, but nowhere to go but a busy road and a residential neighborhood on the other side, and they didn't know how far the anti-apparition wards extended. Most of the Muggles were just running flat out, but in broad daylight it would be like a shooting gallery for the Death Eaters. "There, my lord, there!" a voice came from inside. "Harry Potter!" It was him. Harry caught Hermione's eye. He looked ready to bolt, but she held up a finger to stop him. She motioned for him to move along the wall as far as possible to stay out of sight, while she looked above her head and saw what she needed just inside on the ceiling, and she threw all of her effort behind her next spell. "Zevidono!" It took every ounce of her strength, but she heard the telltale creaking. She hoped the Death Eaters wouldn't catch on before it was too late. Hermione used that distraction to bolt for the nearest car, and Harry followed her. "Dobby, help!" she called, not really expecting an answer. Peeking through the car window, they saw it. "You cannot hide from me, Harry! What—" Crash! Unscrewed from their fixtures, all of the fluorescent lights in the cafeteria ceiling crashed down at once on you-know-who and the Death Eaters' heads. With a lot of luck, maybe they'd get mercury poisoning too. "Run!" Some of the Muggles, as well as the Weasleys, were darting from car to car for cover, as did Harry and Hermione. But they knew they couldn't get out of the car park fast enough. Hermione had both wands out and ready to fight. Any glimpse of a black robe she saw, and she cursed on sight, but that was the least of their worries. The sound of more distant explosions rang out, and smoke started to rise from other parts of the hospital. Hermione desperately hoped that didn't mean what she thought it did. There was a distinctive creaking sound, and Harry looked up. "Look out!" he yelled. He dove and pushed Hermione down and out of the way just before a car crashed down where they were crouching. "Potter!" you-know-who called. Harry looked up and saw him staring him right in the face. "The boy is mine! Kill the others!" he called. "Avada Kedavra!" Harry and Hermione rolled in separate directions, narrowly avoiding the curse. They didn't pause, though, and neither did you-know-who. Curses flew in all directions. Hermione was vaguely aware of fights going on elsewhere in the car park. "Ginny! Fred! Dad! Die, blood traitors!" There was a creaking sound as you-know-who lifted not one, but two more cars, and this time set them on fire before he flung them through the air. Hermione ran to get away from one of them before it crashed down. It didn't explode on impact like a bomb, like in the movies, but throwing a flaming car across a car park made a pretty impressive firestorm. She couldn't see Harry, but she was put in sight of another masked Death Eater. "Avada Kedavra!" She dodged the deadly curse while putting up a shield charm against a follow-up, and casting a curse of her own back. She kept casting curses on the run until she managed to dive behind a van. Boom! She was knocked to the ground as the van exploded right in front of her. Moments later, there were more explosions. She caught a glimpse of you-know-who hovering a foot or two off the ground, heedless of the additional exposure, gliding slowly, inexorably forward. "How is he bloody doing that?" Hermione whispered to herself, then ran again. You-know-who conserved his movements whilst still blocking hostile curses. He was casually blowing up random cars as he went to smoke them out. "Miss Hermione!" She turned to the voice. "Dobby!" The elf was standing at the edge of the road, holding her sword and buckler as if to fight with them. Had he apparated outside the Death Eater's wards? "There you are, mudblood!" Hermione spun around, shield charm up. It was Rookwood. He spun his wand in a triple twirl she knew intimately, and she was forced to dodge away from her own shotgun curse. "Surrender and the Dark Lord might let you live," he said. "You can't fight in your condition." "Watch me," she growled. "Commotio cordis." "Zwinger, pulmonary edema." "Citadella." She's copying my style now? Ossificans. Rookwood silently made what looked like the wand motion for trigeminal neuralgia and followed up with Velere. "Screw it," she thought. "Oculus flammare, Titania." Hermione almost knew what was going to happen before it did. Rookwood froze for a fraction of a second in shock at having his spells thrown back at him for a change. Just like Hermione, he barely dodged the first spell and was hit by the second, causing him to drop to the ground in a seizure. "Hermione, look out!" George yelled. She turned and put up another shield charm on general principle, which might have saved her life because that moment she was knocked to the ground not by a spell, but by 16 stone of pure muscle. A large, very hairy man with blue-black eyes and pointed yellow teeth loomed over her with his weight pressing down on her shield. She raised her other wand, but he smacked it away. She reached out and tried to summon it wandlessly again, unable to release her shield. "Hello, girlie," Greyback growled. "Aren't you a pretty little prize? I prefer a bit younger than you, but you'll do." "Aye! What the? Aye!" Dobby charged Greyback, holding Snickersnack like a lance as he closed the distance and stabbed the werewolf in the shoulder. Greyback recoiled and jumped off of Hermione, and she didn't fully process what happened next until it was over. She remembered Snickersnack wobbling dangerously in Dobby's hands, almost directly above her face. Reaching and grabbing the hilt before he could cut her throat by accident. Greyback charged again, and she brought her hands together and swung hard. It actually sounded like Snickersnack, or at least a little snick, when the molecular thin blade cut through his neck. Greyback's wand sparked with whatever curse he was about to cast as his head rolled to the ground and cracked on the pavement, a look of clear surprise on his face. Hermione rolled over and rose into a crouch, setting Snickersnack down and summoning her other wand. Suddenly George was there, crouching beside her. "Bloody hell!" he said. She looked down at Greyback's body, but it was the sight of multiple Muggle bodies strewn around the car park that unsettled her more. It was only then that she realized she was covered in blood. That was one more set of clothes ruined, she thought distantly. Even untransformed, the blood could be dangerous. "Here, take the sword," she said. "Thank you, Dobby. Where do the wards end?" "At the road, Miss Hermione." She turned around. She couldn't see Harry. There was a swirling cloud of smoke in the middle of the car park, but they were almost at the road already. Little more than a fence stood between them and heavy traffic, though slowed by panicking Muggles running across it, and hopefully freedom. She looked down the last line of cars in the car park and saw Ginny, Fred, and Ron all trying to catch their breaths. She couldn't see the others, and could only hope they got away. They were pinned down there with spells still flashing behind them, but the remaining Death Eaters seemed to be waiting for them to come out of hiding, which they would have to do to escape. Suddenly there was a shout and a bang. "There you are!" Pettigrew's voice said, and Harry screamed. She saw them then. Pettigrew had Harry in a chokehold and was dragging him into the open. "Nubis minuta!" It took all of her effort, but she conjured a thin wall of fog between Harry and you-know-who. George got the hint and started shooting hexes at Pettigrew. Pettigrew tried to pull Harry through the fog, but having to fend off the hexes at the same time gave Harry just enough leverage to break free. Hermione didn't get a clear view, but it looked like Harry spun around, kicked him in the bollocks, knocked him to the ground, and put his wand to his head all in the space of a couple seconds. There was a flash of light, and Pettigrew's body went limp. In that time, Hermione cast another fog wall between her and George and the Death Eaters, and she took charge. "Run!" They ran, the others casting smoke screens too. George slashed through the fence as they reached it, and then it was chaos again. The entire verge from the fence to the road went up in flames all at once. Muggles, caught in the flames, screamed in agony, reminding Hermione far too much of her ordeal earlier. She spun and saw the entire wall of smokescreen vanish in an instant. "You will not escape!" You-Know-Who hissed. He waved his wand, and no fewer than 6 flaming cars rose into the air behind him. Just how powerful was he? "Just go!" Hermione screamed. She charged headlong at the fire, pulling George behind her. In other places, indoors, on tarmac, anything solid, and this wouldn't have worked. But she cast an overpowered charm that she'd only really used in herbology class that overturned the earth and buried the fire, opening a path through it. George cast it too and widened the path. "Go, go, go!" she yelled. "Augmenti!" She cast it at her clothes and hair rather than the fire itself. "Ginny! George! George! Harry! Fred! Ron!" She ran through the flames, felt the burning on her left side, all the worse for her recent cruciatus exposure. The space was narrow, and the earth-moving spells weren't enough to fully protect her. Screams and curses filled the air, but she kept running. She tried apparating, tried again, and she fell on the floor of the lobby of the factory. She was also on fire. "Ah!" she flailed frantically. "Stop, drop, roll! Augmenti! Stop, drop, roll! Augmenti!" When the dust cleared and she came to her senses, Hermione found herself lying on her back, soaking wet, blood-stained, badly singed, and in more pain than she'd felt since she escaped Bellatrix's clutches. She wasn't sure she could even stand. "Hermione?" George groaned. "Alive?" she groaned. "Harry?" "Here," Harry said. Her head dropped to the floor with a thunk. "Ginny!" came a cry. Ginny? Hermione thought. Luna ran into the room, sounding very concerned. "What are you doing here?" She knelt down, presumably beside Ginny, and started casting what Hermione could only hope were healing spells. "We got mixed up in the fire," Harry said. Hermione picked up her head and saw that he was as soaked and singed as she was. "A fire?" Mr. Lovegood exclaimed. "Merlin's beard! Was it heliopaths?" Harry glared at him. "It was You-Know-Who." "Oh, that's even worse." "Did you see Fred?" George said worriedly. "No, sorry," Harry said. "He's not here?" Hermione said. "We got separated," George said. "Bloody hell," she groaned. "Anyone else?" "Not here, but they're not supposed to be." No one mentioned Bill. They hadn't had any kind of chance to go back to him. "You're hurt," Mr. Lovegood said. "Can we help?" "I've got burn healing paste," George said wearily. "The burns are the worst of it." "For you, maybe," Hermione thought. She had one priority she needed to address. "Luna, I need your help," she said. "And be careful what you touch. I need to burn these clothes and wash off. I've got Grey-Black's blood all over me." Luna and Mr. Lovegood gasped. "Werewolf blood?" Mr. Lovegood said. "You weren't bitten, were you?" "No, just the blood. He didn't get the chance." "What happened to Greyback, though?" "I cut his head off." Mr. Lovegood swooned and sank into a chair. "Oh my," he said. "Pettigrew's dead, too," Harry said. "Finally. I put a piercing hex through his head." "One more bit of good news," Hermione said. "Dobby!" He was there, too, a little roughed up but mostly uninjured. "Thank you. You probably saved my life. That was very impressive how you charged him with the sword." Dobby blushed and ducked his head. It is my pleasure to serve, Miss Hermione," he said. Luna was shaken by her revelation, but she grabbed some rags and the burn healing paste and helped Hermione to the bathroom without touching her directly. She would be fine unless she got a scratch from it, but better safe than sorry. Hermione could only hope she was lucky there. She removed her clothes, and Luna said she would burn them on the factory floor. Meanwhile, she wound up sitting down in the shower cubicle with the water pouring over her after carefully setting it to slightly cool. Then she finally broke down and cried from the pain. After a while, she shut off the water and rubbed the paste over her body on her left side where the fire had gotten a little too hot. Once that was done, she leaned on the wall of the cubicle, too tired to move. She hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and she'd been through hell in that time. She didn't think she'd be able to get up for quite a while. She was half asleep in the shower when she heard a knock on the door and a shout of, "Hermione!" It was George, and his voice sounded shaky. "George, what's wrong?" She called back, then thought about it and added, "You can open the door, but not the curtain." The door banged open. "Harry and we got messages on our rings," he said. Hermione drew a breath and braced herself. Harry had the ring that connected to Bill and Fleur, and George had the one that connected to Arthur, Molly, and Percy. "What did they say?" she said. "Harry said, Fleur, Mum, and the baby are at Shell Cottage, but Bill and Muriel didn't make it." Hermione gasped. She stammered as too many thoughts crowded her head at once. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe—" "One of the Death Eaters went through the hospital and blew something up where they were working on him." "Nitrous oxide, I'll bet," she said, remembering the explosions. "Oh, this is all my fault. Why does this keep going wrong?" "It's not your fault, Hermione," George mumbled. "Why not?" she sobbed. "All of my plans go wrong." "It's not," he insisted. "I almost wish it were. Maybe it'd be easier, but it's that bloody Death Eater's fault," he growled. "I bet it was Dolohov. It's always Dolohov. I wish I could—" He stopped and let out a quiet sob. "I'm sorry. It's too much right now." Take care of yourself right now, George," Hermione said. "Listen, send Luna back up. I'll need her help. I'll be there as soon as I can. Wait, what was the other message?" "Dad, Fred, Ron, and Percy are at Muriel's. They're all alive." Good. Send Luna, please. I'll be right down. Oh, and pass the message to the others if you haven't." A few minutes later, Luna helped Hermione out of the shower, and she dressed in some of her remaining clothes. In passing, Luna mentioned that Ginny didn't have anything here, and between the two of them they put together an outfit that, more or less, fit her. When Hermione descended the stairs, the boys had changed too, probably deciding that their clothes were unsalvageable. Ginny was crying on Harry's shoulder, and Harry looked grim. The Lovegoods sat off to the side. George held her close when she sat down beside him, but she flinched away, in too much pain to do it properly. He looked like he was about to break down entirely when she did that, so she struggled to find a position where she could be comfortable. No one spoke for a long while, but eventually they started reviewing what had happened. "Harry," George said, "don't take this the wrong way, mate, but I'm kinda surprised you survived fighting you-know-who that long." Harry shook his head. "He kept throwing cards at me," he said. "I think if he spent more time trying to curse me directly, I'd be dead." "Why would he do that?" Ginny asked softly. "Our wands have brother cords. They don't work right against each other. I told you what happened in the graveyard." Hermione remembered that. As he'd told her, when the spells collided, a golden light connected their wands, and you-know-who's wand started spitting out the spells it had cast in reverse order, including apparitions of Harry's parents. "I figured it was just one more complication," Harry said. "I have to land a spell on him without having it collide to get him, but he's going more roundabout." "Thank God for that," Ginny mumbled. "Anything that puts him behind." "He's still too powerful to take on," Hermione said. "If he hadn't been so focused on you, I think he could have wiped most of us out. Hell, he nearly did. I don't know how he can get that much power." Harry shrugged. I guess we just have to be smarter than him." "I hope that's enough. Even if we destroy all the Horcruxes, I don't know how we're going to take him down." "We'll just have to try," George said. No one had anything to say to that. A little while later, a weasel Patronus came flying in the window. Hermione didn't know how Arthur could cast one at a time like this, but he'd managed it. It must have been important, too. For short messages, he'd just use his ring. "Fred, Ginny, Harry, Hermione," he said. "Stay where you are for now, including you, Ginny. The boys and I can't stay at Muriel's because we don't know how the inheritance will work with the current regime. We're going to find a new place to hide. Don't look for us. You know there are snatchers out hunting for the Order. You're better off staying there. I'll message you again when we're safe. Stay strong." The Patronus vanished, and the feeling of foreboding it had briefly driven away returned. What did he mean about the inheritance? Harry said. In theory, Muriel should have been able to name her own heir, George said. But with the Weasleys being blacklisted, the Ministry might be able to contest it. If it passes out of the Prewett family, it won't be Prewett Manor anymore. Harry groaned. Oh, and the Fidelis charm breaks if the secret it protects is no longer true. George nodded. Mm-hmm. Using the address should have been safer than the owner's name, but in this case they were the same. Hermione sighed. Well, we can't stay here either, she said. The Fidelis is solid, but the Death Eater's nowhere in Nottingham. We step out those doors and they'll be swarming us. We need to leave before we run out of food. Sorry, Mr. Lovegood. I'm sure we can find another place, Miss Granger, he said. Uh-huh, she said absently. I'm sorry, she said again. It's not your fault, Harry said. I'm the one who suggested the Muggle hospital. But none of this would have happened if I hadn't pushed so hard to raid Malfoy Manor, she snapped. She glanced at the Lovegoods. As happy as I am to have saved you, Luna, anything else about last night was a disaster. But this is war, George said. Bad stuff happens. We all agreed on the Malfoy Manor plan. It was Ron who planned it, Harry pointed out, and even Kingsley agreed. Well, sometimes I wonder if people should be so quick to trust my advice, Hermione muttered. She stood up and went to the wireless, tuning it to a Muggle station. I don't know if this is the time for music, Hermione, George said. I want to hear what the Muggles are saying about the hospital. George grimaced. That might be even worse. I want to hear it, Harry spoke up. You know that wasn't your fault either, Ginny said. It was my idea to go for a Muggle hospital, Gin. You couldn't have known you-know-who would come. But it was my book that led them to us, Hermione sobbed. I didn't even know that inscription was there. And now Bill's gone, and a bunch of other people died too. Innocent Muggles who never even knew what was happening. George came up behind her and very lightly embraced her, trying not to hurt her. It still wasn't your fault, Hermione, he said. Maybe, but I still need to hear it, she insisted. She found a BBC station and waited a few minutes for a news bulletin. At least 20 people are dead and dozens injured after a firebombing at the University of Nottingham Hospital in the deadliest day of the Troubles since 1979. Authorities say the bombing came without any telephoned threats or warnings for civilians, in a break from the IRA's usual practice. The motive for attacking a hospital is unclear, but authorities say they have identified the perpetrators as a pair of IRA sympathizers named Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. Potter is carrying multiple guns, and Granger is known to police as a master of explosives and improvised weaponry. They have been seen at multiple locations around Great Britain in recent weeks and should be considered armed and very dangerous. Hermione looked up and saw 5 horrified faces staring back at her. We have to leave, she said hollowly. Nowhere is safe.